Jake Miller checked his rifle for the third time in 10 minutes. The weapon felt cold in his hands, just like everything else on this frozen moon. Titan Base sat on the surface of Kepler 442c, a barren rock that nobody cared about until the war started. Now it was humanity's most important outpost, the only thing standing between Earth and the alien fleet. Danny Carter sat beside him in the transport, cleaning his communication gear with the same care Jake showed his gun. They had been battle buddies for 2 years now, ever since basic training on Mars. Danny was younger, just 24, but he was the best comm specialist Jake had ever worked with. More than that, he was the closest thing to family Jake had. "Left. You think they'll hit us today?" Danny asked, not looking up from his radio. Jake shrugged. "They hit us every day. Question is how hard." The Zephyrian Empire had been trying to take Titan Base for 3 months. Their ships were faster, and their weapons were stronger, but humans were stubborn. Every attack met fierce resistance. Every day brought new casualties, but the base held. Commander Lisa Hayes sat at the front of the transport studying a data pad. She was tough as nails, the kind of officer who led from the front. Jake respected her, which was rare. Most officers stayed safe in their bunkers while soldiers died in the field. "Listen up," Hayes called out. "Patrol Route 7 today. Standard sweep, but keep your eyes open. Intelligence thinks the bugs are planning something big." The soldiers called the aliens bugs because of their insect-like appearance. Jake had seen them up close during border skirmishes. They were tall, with multiple arms and dark chitinous armor. Their faces were hard to read, but their weapons spoke clearly. Enough. The transport landed at Checkpoint Alpha, a small outpost 10 kilometers from the main base. Jake and Danny jumped out with their squad, boots crunching on the frozen ground. The sky above was dark purple, filled with strange clouds that never seemed to move. Captain Ryan Brooks was waiting for them. He was a good officer, fair but strict. "Miller, Carter, take point. I want a full sensor sweep of Sector 9. Something's been jamming our communications out there." Jake nodded and grabbed his gear. Danny slung his radio pack over his shoulder and followed. They had done this patrol dozens of times. The routine was simple: walk the perimeter, check for enemy activity, report back. Usually nothing happened. Today was different. They were halfway through Sector 9 when Danny's radio started crackling with strange signals. He stopped walking and adjusted his equipment, frowning at the readings. "Jake, you need to see this," Danny said quietly. Jake looked at the scanner Danny was holding. The screen showed dozens of red dots approaching from space. More dots than Jake had ever seen before. His blood went cold. "How many ships is that?" Jake asked. Danny's face was pale. "Over 200. Maybe more. It's the entire Zephyrian fleet." Jake grabbed his radio. "Command, this is Miller. We have massive enemy contacts approaching. Repeat, massive enemy contacts." Static filled the radio. Then Hayes' voice came through, tight with tension. "Confirmed, Miller. All units return to base. Immediately. This is not a drill." They started running. Behind them, the sky began to change. Bright flashes appeared among the purple clouds as the first enemy ships entered the atmosphere. The ground shook with distant explosions. Jake and Danny reached the transport just as enemy fighters screamed overhead. The sleek alien craft moved like silver arrows, too fast for human weapons to track. Laser fire lit up the darkness as the base's defense guns tried to fight back. The transport took off quickly, racing toward Titan Base. Through the windows, Jake could see the battle beginning. Massive Zephyrian ships descended from orbit like metal mountains. Their weapons carved burning scars across the landscape. "They're going for the main reactor," Hayes said, studying her tactical display. "If they take out our power, the shields go down." Jake looked at Danny. His friend was pale but determined. They both knew what this meant. The Zephyrians had never attacked with this many ships before. This wasn't a raid or a probe. This was an invasion. The transport shuddered as enemy fire exploded nearby. Through the smoke, Jake could see Titan Base ahead. The massive dome that protected the colony was flickering, its energy shields failing under heavy bombardment. "We're not going to make it," the pilot called back. Hayes grabbed the radio. "All units, Emergency Protocol 7. Repeat, Emergency Protocol 7. Jake knew what that meant. Evacuation. After 3 months of holding the line, they were abandoning Titan Base. The transport crashed just outside the base perimeter. Jake pulled himself from the wreckage, his head ringing from the impact. Danny was beside him, blood running down his face but still alive. Around them, the battle was chaos. Human soldiers fired at enemy troops while civilians ran for the evacuation. Ships. Buildings exploded under alien bombardment, the air filled with smoke and screams. "The reactor," Danny said, pointing toward the base's center. "They're heading for the reactor." Jake saw it too. A group of Zephyrian soldiers was advancing toward the main power plant. If they destroyed it, the shields would fail completely. The evacuation ships would be sitting ducks. "We have to stop them," Jake said. Danny nodded. They grabbed their weapons and started running toward the reactor building. Enemy fire whizzed past their heads as they moved from cover to cover. The base's automated defenses were failing one by one. They reached the reactor just as the alien soldiers broke through the outer door. Jake and Danny took position behind a concrete barrier and opened fire. Their bullets sparked off alien armor, but some found gaps in the protection. "I can overload the reactor," Danny shouted over the gunfire. "Create a feedback pulse that'll take out their command ship." Jake looked at him. "That'll kill anyone in the building." "I know," Danny said quietly, "but it'll save the evacuation ships." Jake wanted to argue, to find another way, but there wasn't time. More alien soldiers were coming. The shield generators were failing. In minutes, the entire base would be overrun. Danny handed Jake his dog tags and a small data chip. "Give these to Katie. Tell her I kept my promise." Before Jake could stop him, Danny ran toward the reactor controls. Enemy fire followed him, but he made it to the console. His fingers flew over the controls as Jake provided covering fire. "Danny, get out of there," Jake yelled, but Danny just smiled. "Take care of my sister, Jake." The reactor exploded in a ball of white light. The explosion tore through the building and reached into space, destroying the Zephyrian command ship in orbit. Jake was thrown backward by the blast, his vision filled with fire. When he woke up, evacuation teams were pulling him toward a rescue ship. Titan Base was gone, nothing left but smoking ruins. Danny was gone too, vaporized in the reactor explosion, along with dozens of enemy soldiers. Jake clutched Danny's dog tags as the ship carried him away from the battlefield. His best friend was dead, but the evacuation fleet was safe. Danny had kept his promise, just like always. The war would continue, but Jake's part in it felt over. All he had left was grief and a promise to deliver a message to a girl he had never met. 3 months had passed since Titan Base fell. Jake Miller sat alone in his quarters aboard Armstrong Station, staring at Danny's dog tags. The metal felt warm in his hands, worn smooth by countless touches. He had carried them every day since the evacuation, a reminder of his failure to save his best friend. Armstrong Station orbited Earth like a metal moon, bristling with weapons and shields. It was humanity's last line of defense, home to 10,000 soldiers and support staff. Jake should have felt safe here, but safety was a luxury he could no longer afford to believe in. His new squad mates had given up trying to talk to him. Alex Turner, a young corporal from Texas, still made attempts at friendship, but Jake pushed him away like all the others. Friendship meant caring, and caring meant losing people. Jake had lost enough. The mission alerts came daily. Patrol runs, escort, duties, reconnaissance flights. Jake took the most dangerous assignments, the ones other soldiers avoided. His commanding officers noticed his reckless behavior but said nothing. The war needed soldiers willing to die, and Jake seemed eager to oblige. Tonight felt different, though. Jake had returned from a deep space patrol that should have killed him. His fighter had taken heavy damage fighting Zephyrian scouts near Jupiter's moons. By all rights, he should be in the medical bay, not sitting in his quarters drinking synthetic coffee and avoiding sleep. Sleep brought dreams of Danny dying over and over again. Dreams of explosions and screaming metal. Dreams where Jake was fast enough, smart enough, good enough to save his friend. He always woke up disappointed. The door chime startled him. Jake looked at the clock display. It was past midnight, well beyond normal visiting hours. Security protocols locked down personal quarters after 10 p.m. Nobody should be able to get in without authorization. "Enter," Jake called, assuming it was Alex Turner again with another misguided attempt at friendship. The door slid open, and Jake's blood turned to ice. A young woman stood in the doorway, maybe 22 years old, with auburn hair and green eyes that looked exactly like Danny's. She wore civilian clothes, simple jeans, and a sweater that looked expensive. Her face was calm, almost serene, as if appearing in a secured military station was perfectly normal. "Hello, Jake," she said quietly. "My name is Katie Carter." Jake's hand shook as he set down his coffee cup. Danny had talked about his little sister constantly. Katie the genius, studying quantum physics at Stanford. Katie the dreamer, who wanted to explore new worlds. Katie the innocent, who believed the war would end with peace instead of victory. "You're dead," Jake whispered. "The record said you were killed when they hit the research station." Katie stepped into his quarters, the door sliding shut behind her. She moved with quiet confidence, her eyes taking in every detail of the small room. When she saw Danny's dog tags on Jake's desk, her composure cracked for just a moment. "The records were wrong," she said. "I've been working on a classified project, quantum entanglement research officially, the kind of science that shouldn't exist yet." Jake stood up slowly, his hand moving toward the pistol on his belt. Nothing about this made sense. Civilians couldn't access military stations. Security would have stopped her at a dozen checkpoints, yet here she was, talking like her impossible presence was perfectly reasonable. "How did you get in here?" Jake asked. Katie smiled, and Jake saw Danny's mischievous grin reflected in her features. "That's complicated. The simple version is that space isn't as solid as people think. With the right equipment and enough power, you can step between distant points without crossing the space in between." "Teleportation," Jake said flatly. "You're telling me you teleported onto the most secure military station in human space?" "Something like that." Katie sat down in Jake's only chair, making herself comfortable. "Though teleportation isn't quite the right word, think of it more like quantum tunneling on a macro scale." Jake kept his hand near his weapon. This woman might look like Danny's sister, but appearances could be deceiving. The Zephyrians had infiltration technology that could fool most security systems. For all he knew, this was an enemy agent using Katie's appearance to get close to him. "Prove you're who you say you are," Jake demanded. Katie reached into her sweater and pulled out a photograph. She tossed it onto Jake's desk where he could see it clearly. The picture showed a younger Danny in his dress uniform, standing next to a girl in a graduation gown. Both were smiling at the camera with identical grins. "Danny's graduation from flight school," Katie said. "He was so proud that day. You should have seen him trying to teach me to march in formation. I kept stepping on his feet." Jake's throat tightened. Danny had told him that exact story during a long night shift 2 years ago. It wasn't the kind of detail that would be in any official record. "If you're really Katie Carter," Jake said carefully, "then you know why I'm here. You know what happened to Danny." Katie's face went still. The playful expression disappeared, replaced by something harder and more focused. "My brother died saving the evacuation fleet from Titan Base. He overloaded the reactor core and took out a Zephyrian command ship in the process. He gave you his dog tags and a message for me." Jake reached for the data chip Danny had pressed into his hands during those final moments. "He said to tell you he kept his promise. I don't know what that means." Katie took the chip with trembling fingers. "It means he found out the truth about the war. The real truth, not the propaganda they feed to soldiers and civilians." She inserted the chip into a small device that materialized in her hand. Jake blinked, certain he had imagined it. But there it was, a piece of technology that hadn't existed moments before, somehow pulled from empty air. "I need your help, Jake," Katie said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Danny discovered something before he died. Something that could end this war, but not in the way anyone expects." Jake sat back down heavily. I'm listening. The Zephyrians aren't invaders, Katie said. They're refugees. Something is chasing them across the galaxy. Something that makes their empire look like children playing with toys. They came to human space looking for allies, not conquest. That's impossible, Jake protested. I've fought them. I've seen what they do to our colonies. Katie nodded. You've seen what happens when desperate people are met with violence instead of understanding. The shooting started because of translation errors and cultural misunderstandings. Now both sides are too proud and too afraid to stop. She leaned forward, her green eyes intense. But Danny found proof. Hidden communications, intercepted transmissions, records of failed diplomatic contacts. It's all on this chip, encrypted in a code only I can break. Jake stared at her. Even if that's true, what do you expect me to do about it? I'm just a soldier. I expect you to help me steal the rest of the evidence, Katie said calmly. There's a Zephyrian research facility in the asteroid belt. They're working on defense systems against the real enemy, the thing that's been chasing them. We need to get inside and copy their files. Jake laughed bitterly. You want me to desert my post and attack an alien base? That's treason. That's peace, Katie corrected. Danny died believing the war could end if people just knew the truth. Are you going to let his sacrifice be meaningless? Jake looked at Danny's dog tags again. His friend had always been the idealist, the one who believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. Jake had been the practical one, the realist who focused on survival. But practicality hadn't saved Danny. How do I know you're not lying? Jake asked. How do I know this isn't some elaborate setup? Katie stood up and walked to his window. Outside, Earth hung in space like a blue marble, beautiful and fragile. Because I'm asking you to risk everything for a chance at peace instead of a guarantee. A victory. Lies are usually more appealing than that. Jake joined her at the window. Down on Earth, billions of people went about their lives, unaware that their fate might depend on the decision of one bitter soldier and one impossible girl. If we do this, Jake said slowly, there's no going back. They'll court-martial me or worse. Katie smiled, and once again Jake saw Danny's expression on her face. Danny always said you were the bravest person he knew. He said you'd risk anything for the people you cared about. Danny's dead, Jake replied harshly. But his sister isn't, Katie said quietly. And neither are the billions of people on both sides who don't have to die if we're brave enough to try something different. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on him. In his mind, he heard Danny's voice from that last day. Take care of my sister, Jake. Maybe this was how he kept that promise. When do we leave? Jake asked. Jake followed Katie through the restricted sections of Armstrong Station, his heart pounding with each step. She moved like she owned the place, her security clearance somehow opening doors that should have been sealed to civilians. Every time, a guard nodded respectfully at her. Jake's confusion grew deeper. They reached Laboratory 7 in the station's core, a facility Jake had never seen before despite living on the station for 3 months. The massive room hummed with energy, filled with equipment that looked more alien than human. In the center sat a metallic arch covered in strange symbols. Welcome to Project Gateway, Katie said, running her hand along the arch's surface. Officially, we're studying quantum mechanics. Unofficially, we're reverse engineering Zephyrian technology. Dr. Helen Park looked up from a control console, her face serious behind thick glasses. She was Katie's supervisor, Jake realized, and she didn't look surprised to see him. Miss Carter, I trust you've explained the situation to Sergeant Miller. Some of it, Katie replied. He deserves to know the rest. Jake felt sick. How long has this been going on? How long has humanity been working with alien technology? Dr. Park gestured to a wall display showing star maps and technical diagrams. 3 years since the war began. The first Zephyrian ship we captured had technology centuries ahead of ours. The government decided to study it in secret. While soldiers died fighting them, Jake said bitterly. While politicians refused to admit they might be wrong about who the real enemy was, Katie corrected. The Zephyrians tried to communicate with us 12 times before the shooting started. Every message was intercepted and classified. She activated a holographic display that showed the intercepted transmissions. Jake watched alien figures gesturing desperately, their translator program struggling with human languages. The messages were garbled, but their meaning was clear. Warning. Danger. Help us. They were trying to warn us about something called the Devourers, Dr. Park explained. An artificial intelligence collective that consumes entire civilizations. The Zephyrian Empire has been fleeing across the galaxy for 50 years, staying just ahead of the swarm. Jake stared at the alien faces in the recordings. They looked afraid, nothing like the ruthless invaders he had been trained to hate. If this is true, why hasn't the government told anyone? Katie laughed bitterly. Because admitting they were wrong would end political careers. Because the military-industrial complex makes money from war, not peace. Because fear is easier to sell than cooperation. She led him to another console where Danny's data chip was already loaded. The screen filled with encrypted files, communication logs, and tactical reports. Jake recognized his friend's digital signature on dozens of documents. Danny stumbled onto this 3 months before Titan Base fell, Katie said. He was monitoring Zephyrian communications when he noticed patterns that didn't match invasion protocols. They were evacuation orders, refugee management, desperate calls for safe harbor. Jake read the translated messages with growing horror. Families separated during the flight from their homeworld. Military units stretched thin trying to protect civilian convoys. Supply shortages as the Zephyrian fleet struggled to maintain itself in hostile territory. He tried to report it to command, Katie continued. They buried his findings and threatened him with court-martial if he talked, so he started collecting evidence on his own. One file made Jake's blood run cold. It was a tactical assessment of Earth's defenses written in Danny's handwriting. But instead of recommending improvements, it documented weaknesses, points where the Zephyrian fleet could break through if they chose to attack in force. He was helping them, Jake whispered. He was trying to end the war, Katie said firmly. The Zephyrians could have taken Earth any time in the past 3 years. They have the ships and the firepower. But they didn't, because they're not invaders. They're refugees looking for a safe place to make a stand against the real threat. Dr. Park brought up another display, this one showing deep space sensor readings. The Devourer fleet is approximately 18 months behind the Zephyrians. When it arrives, it won't distinguish between human and alien worlds. It will consume everything. Jake sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. Every battle he had fought, every friend he had lost, every sleepless night haunted by alien faces had been based on lies. The war he had dedicated his life to was not just pointless, it was actively making humanity less safe. Why me? Jake asked. If you have this evidence, why do you need a soldier? Katie's expression softened. Because the evidence isn't complete. We have fragments, pieces, of a larger puzzle. The full data is stored at a Zephyrian research facility in the asteroid belt. They're working on defensive technologies that could stop the Devourers, but they need human cooperation to make it work. She activated the portal arch, and energy began building between the metal supports. My quantum tunneling technology can get us there undetected, but I need someone who knows how to operate under combat conditions. Someone who can adapt when the mission goes wrong. Someone expendable, Jake said quietly. Someone brave, Katie corrected. Danny always said you were the bravest person he knew. He said you'd walk through hell if you thought it would save innocent people. Jake looked at the portal, its surface rippling like water. Beyond it lay answers to questions that had tormented him for months. The truth about the war, about Danny's death, about the future of both species. If we do this and get caught, they'll execute us both, Jake said. Katie nodded. Probably. But if we don't do it, everyone dies anyway when the Devourers arrive. Dr. Park handed Jake a small device that looked like a modified radio. This will translate Zephyrian speech and help you navigate their computer systems. The facility we're targeting is lightly defended, more of a research station than a military base. Jake clipped the translator to his belt next to his sidearm. How do you know so much about their operations? Katie's smile was sad. Because they've been trying to make contact with me for months. They know about my research, about the quantum tunneling technology. They want to meet. The portal stabilized, showing a view of an asteroid facility surrounded by alien ships. The station was smaller than Jake had expected, more like a research laboratory than a fortress. It looked peaceful, almost beautiful in the starlight. "There's something else you should know," Katie said as they prepared to step through the portal. "The Zephyrians aren't just refugees. They're the last survivors of 12 different species that tried to fight the Devourers. Everything they know about warfare, about survival, about courage, they learned by watching civilizations die." Jake paused at the portal's edge. "And you think humans can do better?" "I think humans can do what no one else has tried," Katie replied. "Instead of running or fighting alone, we can stand together. Humans and Zephyrians working as allies instead of enemies." Jake thought about Danny's sacrifice on Titan Base. His friend had died to save an evacuation fleet, protecting people he would never meet. It was the most human thing possible, caring about strangers simply because they were alive and in danger. Maybe that was what the galaxy needed. Not more soldiers or better weapons, but people willing to die for others regardless of species or nationality. "Danny would have done this," Jake said, more to himself than to Katie. "Danny did do this," Katie replied. "He gave us the information we need to make it work. Now we just have to be brave enough to use it." Jake stepped through the portal, feeling reality twist around him as space folded and compressed. When the sensation ended, he was standing in an alien research station surrounded by technology that could save or damn both species. Behind him, Katie materialized from the quantum tunnel, her face determined despite the fear in her eyes. They were committed now, far beyond the reach of human authority or alien suspicion. Whatever happened next would determine whether the war ended with peace or with the extinction of everything they both cared about. The Zephyrian research station was nothing like Jake expected. Instead of cold military corridors, he found himself in a place that felt almost alive. The walls were covered with organic patterns that pulsed with soft light, and the air smelled like rain on metal. Everything was designed for beings much larger than humans, making Jake feel like a child exploring a giant's house. Katie moved beside him with quiet confidence, her translator device humming softly as it analyzed the alien text on nearby displays. They had materialized in what appeared to be a storage area, surrounded by crystalline containers filled with strange liquids. "The main computer core is 3 levels down," Katie whispered, checking the station layout on her scanner. "If the intelligence is right, they're storing everything there. Defense plans, technological specifications, maybe even communication logs with other refugee fleets." Jake drew his sidearm and checked the energy charge. The weapon felt inadequate against alien technology, but it was better than nothing. "How do we know they won't just shoot us on sight?" "We don't," Katie admitted. "But the communications Danny intercepted suggested they're desperate for human contact. They've been trying to reach us for years." They moved deeper into the station, following maintenance corridors that seemed designed for automated systems rather than living beings. The place felt empty, almost abandoned, but Jake's combat instincts told him they were being watched. His suspicions proved correct when they reached the main laboratory level. A figure stepped out from behind a massive computer console, and Jake found himself face to face with his first living Zephyrian. The alien was tall, maybe 7 feet, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished bronze. Its face was insect-like but somehow expressive, with large compound eyes that reflected the room's soft lighting. It wore what might have been a lab coat, covered with symbols that Jake's translator couldn't decode. "Humans," the alien said in heavily accented but understandable English. "We have been expecting you." Jake kept his weapon ready but didn't aim it directly at the creature. "You speak our language." The Zephyrian's head tilted in what might have been amusement. "We have had 3 years to learn. I am Research Director Thixavara. You are the soldier Jake Miller, and you are the scientist Katie Carter." Katie stepped forward, her hands empty and visible. "You know who we are?" "We know many things about your species," Thixavara replied. "We know you fight bravely, but sometimes for the wrong reasons. We know you can be cruel but also capable of great kindness. We know your brother died trying to end this war. Jake's grip tightened on his weapon. Danny's dead because your people attacked our base. Thixvara's forearms moved in a complex gesture that the translator interpreted as deep regret. Your brother died because our communication failed. We tried to evacuate Titan base before the Devourer scouts arrived, but your military interpreted our approach as an attack. The Devourers were at Titan base? Katie asked, her voice tight with shock. The alien activated a holographic display that showed the battle from a different perspective. Jake watched Zephyrian ships moving toward the base, but now he could see what human sensors had missed. Smaller, darker shapes were following the alien fleet, predatory craft that looked like mechanical insects. The advanced scouts arrived 6 hours before our fleet, Thixvara explained. They were preparing to signal the main swarm when we intercepted them. The battle at Titan base was not invasion, it was rescue. Jake stared at the display, watching Danny die over and over again from a dozen different angles. The explosion that killed his friend had indeed destroyed the Zephyrian command ship, but it had also eliminated 3 Devourer scout craft that were hidden in the base's sensor shadows. Danny saved more than the evacuation fleet, Katie whispered. He saved Earth from being discovered. Thixvara nodded solemnly. Your brother was a hero to both our species. His sacrifice bought us time to prepare defenses, to develop new weapons, to plan for the inevitable confrontation. Jake holstered his weapon, finally understanding the full scope of what Danny had achieved. His friend hadn't just died to save human lives. He had died to protect 2 worlds from an enemy neither species could face alone. What do you need from us? Jake asked. The alien led them deeper into the research facility, past laboratories filled with incomprehensible technology. In the center of the complex was a vast chamber containing what looked like a small star, contained within rings of exotic matter. This is our prototype quantum resonance disruptor, Thixvara explained. It can destroy Devourer network nodes, cutting their ships off from the collective consciousness that coordinates their attacks. But the weapon requires both human and Zephyrian technology to function. Katie studied the containment system with obvious fascination. You need our quantum tunneling systems to deliver the disruption field. Precisely. Our ships can carry the weapon close to Devourer formations, but we cannot penetrate their defenses. Your tunneling technology could place the disruptor directly inside their command vessels. Jake walked around the exotic device, trying to understand its implications. One weapon won't stop an entire fleet. No, Thixvara agreed, but it will prove the concept works. If we can demonstrate that cooperation between our species produces superior results, perhaps your leaders and ours can be convinced to work together on a larger scale. A new voice interrupted their conversation, speaking in rapid Zephyrian. Jake's translator worked frantically to keep up as another alien entered the chamber. This one was smaller than Thixvara, with darker skin and more angular features. Commander Veltar reports that human ships are approaching the station, the newcomer said. Military vessels, heavily armed. Katie's face went pale. They tracked us somehow. The quantum signature must have been stronger than I calculated. Jake drew his weapon again, though he knew it would be useless against a human fleet. How long do we have? Thixvara consulted a display that showed the approaching ships. 20 minutes, perhaps less. They are broadcasting surrender demands. We need to download everything, Katie said, pulling out a storage device. All the research data, the communication logs, the defense plans. Without that information, this was all for nothing. The research director led them to the main computer core, a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with alien thoughts. Katie connected her device and began the download process while Jake watched the tactical display. The human fleet was closer now, led by a heavy cruiser that Jake recognized as the UNS Vigilant. Admiral Nash's flagship, known throughout the fleet for its aggressive tactics. They weren't coming to arrest deserters. They were coming to destroy the evidence. The download is only at 30%, Katie reported. We need more time. Thixvara made a decision that surprised Jake. The alien activated the station's communication systems and broadcast on all human military frequencies. Human Fleet, this is Research Director Thixvara of the Zephyrian Refugee Council. We request immediate diplomatic contact. We have information vital to the survival of both our species. Admiral Nash's voice came back cold and angry. Alien vessel, you are harboring human fugitives. Surrender them immediately, or we will open fire. The humans you seek are here voluntarily, assisting in research that could end this war, Thixvara replied calmly. We are not your enemies. We are refugees seeking sanctuary from a threat that endangers us all. I don't negotiate with bugs, Nash snarled. You have 10 minutes to surrender, then we start shooting. Jake looked at Katie, who was still frantically downloading files. The progress indicator showed 60% complete. They needed more time, and the only way to get it was to convince Nash that the research station was more valuable intact than destroyed. Let me talk to him, Jake said. Thixvara activated the communication channel and stepped back. Jake took a deep breath, knowing that his next words might determine whether two species learned to cooperate or continued fighting until the Devourers consumed them both. Admiral Nash, this is Staff Sergeant Jake Miller, Colonial Defense Force. I'm not a fugitive, sir. I'm conducting a reconnaissance mission on orders from Intelligence Command. It was a lie, but a convincing one. Nash would have to verify the claim through official channels, which would take time they desperately needed. Miller, you're out of uniform and off the grid. Nash replied suspiciously. What kind of reconnaissance requires working with alien hostiles? Jake looked at Katie, who gave him an encouraging nod. The download was at 80% now, the alien computer systems sharing their secrets with human technology. The kind that could save Earth, sir, Jake said simply. The kind Danny Carter died trying to complete. There was a long silence on the communication channel. Finally, Nash's voice came back, slightly less hostile. Explain yourself, Sergeant. Jake began talking, buying them the precious minutes they needed to complete their mission, and maybe, just maybe, to save both species from extinction. The Devourer fleet arrived like a plague of metal locusts, their ships blotting out the stars as they swept into the solar system. Jake stood in the command center of the hastily converted Armstrong station, watching the tactical displays with grim fascination. 200 alien vessels moved in perfect formation, each one the size of a city and bristling with weapons that could crack planets. 3 weeks had passed since his conversation with Admiral Nash at the Zephyrian Research Station. 3 weeks of desperate negotiations, heated arguments, and frantic preparation as human and Zephyrian forces learned to work together. The learning curve had been steep and painful, marked by translation errors, cultural misunderstandings, and the stubborn pride of two species that had been killing each other for 3 years. Katie stood beside him, her fingers dancing across control interfaces that mixed human and alien technology. The quantum resonance disruptor was operational now, integrated into a joint strike fleet that represented the best both species could offer. But looking at the enemy formation, Jake wondered if their best would be enough. Contact in 6 hours, reported Colonel Ben Wright, Jake's old instructor from basic training. The grizzled veteran had adapted to joint command faster than most, treating Zephyrian officers with the same professional courtesy he showed human personnel. Combined fleet reports ready for action. Through the observation deck windows, Jake Xiao could see the assembled forces. Human ships flew alongside Zephyrian vessels, their different designs creating an oddly beautiful pattern against the stars. The sight should have been inspiring, but Jake knew that inspiration wouldn't stop the mechanical swarm bearing down on them. President Carol Davis appeared on the main communication screen, her face drawn with exhaustion. The past 3 weeks had aged her visibly as she struggled to sell the alliance to a skeptical Congress and an even more skeptical public. Half the human fleet remained under the command of officers who still considered the Zephyrians enemies. All units, this is Command Central, Davis announced. Today we face an enemy that threatens not just human civilization, but all organic life in this galaxy. We fight not as humans or Zephyrians, but as living beings defending our right to exist. High Archon Veltar, the Zephyrian Supreme Commander, added his voice to the broadcast. His words were translated into dozens of human languages, but the emotion behind them needed no interpretation. For 50 years, my people have fled across the stars. Today, we make our stand. Today, we fight with allies who understand that survival requires unity. Jake checked his equipment one final time. The strike team he would lead included both human Marines and Zephyrian warriors, all trained in the dangerous art of boarding enemy vessels. Their mission was simple in concept but nearly impossible in execution. Deliver Katie's quantum disruptor to the Devourer command ship and detonate it at the exact moment when the enemy's network coordination was at its peak. Katie squeezed his hand, her green eyes reflecting the same fear and determination he felt. "Danny would be proud of us," she said quietly. Jake nodded, thinking of his fallen friend. Danny had died believing that cooperation was possible, that enemies could become allies if they faced a common threat. Now that belief was being put to the ultimate test. The battle began at maximum range, with both fleets exchanging long-distance fire as they closed the gap between them. Devourer weapons were coldly efficient, targeting ship engines and life support systems with mechanical precision. The Allied response was more chaotic but no less deadly, combining human aggression with Zephyrian technology to create devastating attack patterns. Jake's strike team waited in their specially modified assault ship, watching the battle unfold on tactical displays. The combined fleet was holding its own, but barely. For every Devourer vessel destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The enemy's numerical advantage was becoming more apparent with each passing minute. Strike team. "Alpha, you are cleared for approach," came Wright's voice over the communication system. Target designated Devourer Prime, the large pyramid-shaped vessel at grid reference 77 Charlie. Jake looked at his team. 6 human Marines, 4 Zephyrian warriors, and Katie with her precious quantum disruptor. They were probably going to die in the next hour, but they might just take the enemy's command structure with them. The assault ship launched from Armstrong Station's docking bay and immediately came under fire from Devourer interceptors. The pilot, a young woman named Lisa Park, who happened to be Dr. Park's daughter, flew like her life depended on it because it did. Laser bolts and particle beams filled the space around them as they weaved through the battle zone. "Approaching. Target vessel," Lisa announced. "Their hull is some kind of adaptive metal. It's reforming around our penetration attempts." One of the Zephyrian warriors, a veteran named Kickstar, activated a device that looked like a crystalline blade. "Molecular disruptor," he explained to Jake. "It will create a stable breach." The boarding process was brutal and chaotic. Jake's team fought their way through corridors filled with mechanical horrors, creatures that had once been organic, but had been converted into extensions of the Devourer collective consciousness. Every step forward cost blood and ammunition. Katie stayed in the center of the formation, protected by both human and Zephyrian soldiers who had learned to coordinate their tactics despite their different fighting styles. The quantum disruptor hummed with contained energy, its exotic matter core barely stable under combat conditions. They reached the ship's central control node after 20 minutes of savage fighting. The chamber was vast and alien, filled with processing cores that pulsed with artificial thought. At the center sat something that might have once been a living being, now transformed into a hybrid of flesh and machinery. "The collective voice," whispered one of the Zephyrians. "It coordinates fleet movements for this sector." Katie began setting up the disruptor while Jake's remaining team members held the perimeter. Outside the ship, the battle continued to rage. Through the tactical displays, Jake could see that the Allied fleet was being slowly overwhelmed despite their courage and coordination. "Disruptor charging," Katie announced. 30 seconds to activation. The collective voice turned its attention. To them, mechanical tentacles reaching out toward the quantum device. Jake opened fire with everything he had, his weapon's energy bolts carving smoking wounds in the creature's hybrid body. The Zephyrian warriors added their own firepower, their crystalline weapons cutting through metal and flesh with equal ease. 15 seconds, Katie called. More Devourer creatures poured into the chamber, drawn by some signal from their dying commander. Jake's ammunition ran low, then empty. He drew his combat knife and prepared to make his last stand when Kickstar stepped forward, all four of his arms wielding different weapons. For the Alliance, the alien warrior said simply, then charged into the enemy formation. 5 seconds, Katie announced. Jake saw the quantum disruptor reach full charge, its exotic matter core blazing with contained starfire. At the same moment, he felt something tear through his chest, a devourer weapon finding its mark despite his armor. Activation, Katie said and pressed the trigger. The explosion wasn't visible in any normal sense, but Jake felt reality twist around him as quantum fields interacted with the devourer's network nodes. Throughout the command ship, mechanical systems began failing as their connection to the collective consciousness was severed. On the tactical displays, Jake watched the enemy fleet falter. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination suddenly began colliding with each other, their formation breaking apart as individual vessels found themselves cut off from central command. Katie knelt beside him, her hands trying to stop the bleeding from his chest wound. "Stay with me, Jake, we did it. Look at the displays, the Allied fleet is winning." Jake looked and saw that she was right. Human and Zephyrian ships were pressing their advantage, destroying confused and isolated devourer vessels with coordinated strikes. The mechanical swarm that had seemed unstoppable was falling apart as its network coordination collapsed. "Danny would have liked this," Jake whispered, feeling strength drain from his body. Enemies becoming friends. Katie held his hand as the last devourer ships fled or were destroyed. Around them, the alien command ship continued to fail, its systems shutting down one by one as the quantum disruption spread through its network connections. Jake didn't see the rescue teams that pulled them from the dying ship, or the medical teams that somehow managed to save his life. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital on Earth with Katie sitting beside his bed reading a book. "Good, you're awake," she said with a smile that reminded him painfully of Danny. "I was starting to worry you were going to sleep through the peace negotiations." Through the hospital window, Jake could see human and Zephyrian ships docked together at orbital platforms, their crews working side by side to repair battle damage and plan for the future. It was a sight that would have been impossible just a month ago. "Did we win?" Jake asked. Katie's smile widened. "We survived, both species working together. The Devourer fleet is scattered, and preliminary reports suggest our quantum disruptor technology can be scaled up to protect entire star systems." Jake thought about Danny's sacrifice on Titan Base and all the other sacrifices that